Well,
Hi,
hello there, my dear. How's everything going?
it's great. I've been so excited all day. I even did a live in the car and I looked terrible. So, just to tell everybody, don't miss this. So, I was excited.
Exactly. I am excited for everybody to watch. So everybody knows this is like my lifelong work. Um,
Yes.
I've been doing this for a long time. Like you said, I left the state of Florida. I miss it. I miss it, and being able to do a show like this. And you guys have seen me before on serial killers, supernatural, and murderers on this
Mhm.
network, all access network television. But my Tuesday morning serial and all that. But this is a lifelong um, endeavor to help victims and to help people with their children growing up. I've done a lot of work with this, so it's not only the study, the shows and all this other stuff. It's putting it into practice and
Mhm.
looking at the criminal mind and how we could help people. And that's what this show is going to be about. We're gonna go through what I know, because I'm only as good as who I am. There's a lot of profilers out there. Again, it's just a part of the job, the forensic psychology part. It's just a part of the job, getting that data to be able to figure out, what's going on.
Mhm.
And I always want to figure those things out, but you're only as good as your life experience and your intuition. So I'm one of those weirdos. Not only did I learn from some of the best coming up to this point, but also being a shaman and being able to pick up on intuition too, to try and get to the point where I could get fact and help in situations. That is the biggest thing. But most of all, you don't get to this point without friends and family. So I want to thank a lot of people. First, I want to thank my better half, Stacia. Um,
And there she already put her comment up. I
yeah,
know
I
you.
know. I saw it. And without her, this couldn't really come to fruition, because I really hemmed and hawed about it. You know that. Hemmed and
I
hawed
know.
about it for a while, because it is so important to me, and I want to show everybody that emotion and how I look at things and help you guys look at things maybe a little differently. But most of all, I want to thank her and her support and all our friends from Wardruna. We're
Mhm.
pushing Wardruna out too, which has a lot to do with how I look at things also. Most importantly, you guys, Gwen, Lee, Matt, everybody at All Access Network Television, for putting this on the air. We're excited.
And
And
and if let
most
me
of
say
all, right
real
there.
quick, let me say
Yeah.
real quick that Tom, welcome back. You took up a sabbatical, as I called it, but
Yeah.
welcome back and welcome to the network, your new show, on behalf of
Thank
all of
you.
us. And that's a lot of
Oh,
folks now. So.
so appreciate that. I want to, also thank Asia, my manager at Methodical Management, but also my biggest promoter, my promotions. He's done so much for me. You just saw him, Adam Began, with Historically
There's
Haunted.
Asia.
Um, There she is, Historically Haunted Tours. Make sure you get into those. Another person I want to really thank, my business partner, my brother from another mother. I really want to thank Charles Rosenet. So he's part of the Shaman and the Showman, and we've been
Mhm.
bringing a lot of this type of stuff to you guys, whether it be paranormal, whether it be true crime, horror, whatever. Without him, it makes it hard to get into this position. So of course we're promoting Connecticut Paracon, that's coming up on July 11th. So we'll all be there. If you enjoy this show going up to that point, make sure you come by and see us. So a lot of people to thank, but that's like one of the most important things. And again, guys, I know you're all watching. I appreciate everybody watching. So when we get into the content, if I don't acknowledge you, don't feel bad. I want to get you guys as much information as possible, so we could learn along the way over the next few weeks, to the point where when we start getting into some of the cases, that you guys will be armed and dangerous and try and figure things out along with me and make it nice and immersive. But in the meantime, if you do have questions, it's going to
Mhm.
flash below, just a reminder. If you have any questions, put them all in caps. We're going to save them to the end, because what we want to do at the end when we answer these questions, it's a good way to recap the episode, so we could go back over it. So you're not really missing anything, or anything won't be out of context. And again, I do acknowledge all you guys. I appreciate you watching. So when the show is over, I'll probably go back into the comments just to thank you guys all for watching. I am not ignoring anybody. I just think there's a lot of important information. This is the first night. Hopefully we could get through in that hour. If it goes over a little bit, hopefully we have time.
You are good till 9:20.
Okay, perfect. So we have a little bit of time that we could go for, but again, thank you everybody for sticking with me, getting this show back on the air in a different context. I love my time with Gwen, Lee, and Blaine. There was a lot of people messaging me, when are you going to bring something like this back? I do appreciate the shout outs and all that. And hopefully we put a different perspective on it this time around. I got Gwen still with me in the background, but it's going to be pretty much solo. But down the road, we'll have some people on that do have the knowledge in the field, whether they be authors that have done the research. We're going to have them on and get their points of view too. But just setting you up for everything. We're going to do History 101 today, and then a little bit of the past, and then we'll bring it in more of what's going on now, just so you guys get an idea of the history and how profiling came about. One of the more exciting things to me, I don't know about you guys, but that's why they make television and movies about this type of stuff. And I want to bring that to you guys today. But you know what? Without further ado, we're 8 minutes in. So let's zoom in and uncover the criminal mind. So again, thank you guys. But let's get to it. Let's get to the history. The history of criminal profiling is a fascinating evolution. Early on, it was they look at it in a medical intuition, that it became a rigorous behavioral science. So we're going to go and look really back to the beginning. Cain and Abel, figuring out who murdered who and all that. But let's look at the why. Let's look at the who. Let's look into the mind. All right. So with serial killers, we're going to go back really far here. And, just so you know, let's look back to early history, just with murders happened and things like that. And we have to really look at things in there. And I'll give you a little bits of information and then give you a little point of view on it, more of a modern way to look at it. But, even in the beginning, getting groups of people together, just the way things went back then, especially you want to look at a group of women, but a group of women were arrested for poisoning an elite Roman man, marking one of the earliest documented cases of organized poisoning. So that was in ancient Rome, 331 BC, which a lot of people are going to find out over the weeks that a lot of times you look at the men and the women as serial killers, but a lot of times with women, it does come down to them using poison. Almost a lot of the serial killer women are mostly in the medical field, where they have that way of being able to get those medications and poison without getting caught. So that's one of the earlier things with a group of women getting together. So whoever this guy was must have really pissed them off to be able to do that. But, and then you got ancient China. There was a Prince Lu of Sichuan, 144, 116 BC is often cited as a very early political serial killer. He murdered over 100 people for pleasure in politics. So that's another thing we have to look at, especially nowadays. Really look at what's going on in the news, with speculation on a certain island, the politics behind that, just political rivalries, some people ending up murdered for some unknown reason. There is a mentality behind that. And a lot of the things I'm telling you tonight, we're going to dive in really deep as we go into the episodes. But right now we're funneling in really to get down to the nitty gritty of it. But even in ancient Greece, so this is where we start looking at things where there's figures like Procrustes suggested that early stories often characterize serial murders as monsters. So a lot of our lore, where you look at werewolves and things like that, that were brought up, Grimm Brothers things and all those things that went bump in the night, a lot of that stemmed from the fear of finding all these dead bodies and what's going on. And back then, with how they thought, a human couldn't do this, they must be a monster. So that's the mentality back then, was these killers were just basically monsters. They were myth, they were lore. And that's where you get a lot of these ancient characters from, the Roman times, the Greek times, the heroes, the bad things that happened, and where we get a lot of our stuff going on right now with the number 13 and things, all the bad luck, and they look at all these different things and where all that lore comes from. It makes it exciting, but it's the mentality. As our mind changes, as the criminal mind changes, and as we change with it, that's really important with that aspect. But you go into medieval times, um, probably another big one is Elizabeth Bathory. Now, she was a countess. She was accused of murdering hundreds of young women. And it was said that she murdered all these women to get the blood to put it on her face to make herself look younger, which another story comes from is in Snow White. They're looking in the mirror and she felt like she wasn't the prettiest. So she had to do something and take care of Snow White, where a lot of these stories stem from is real people, real stories. But really, Elizabeth Bathory, the evidence really wasn't validated. So nobody really knows for sure, but the lore was there. The name was put in there, and a lot of stories came out of that. Giles de Reyes, he was a decorated French soldier. He kidnapped, tortured, and murdered dozens, perhaps 100 children, eventually caught due to his audacity and investigations by the church. So even back then, without police, the church were investigating murderers and catching up to them. So how things have changed over history. But really, the beginning of our country, I know a lot of people say, well, H.H. Holmes is the first recorded serial killer. But, our country is 1776, but the late 1700s, after the Revolutionary War, there was two brothers down that southern area, the Midwest area, were traveling around and murdering people. The Harper brothers, they were considered the first documented serial killers in America. Kaiser and Wiley Harp terrorized the Western frontier. So giving you all this history and how our minds changed, where people call them monsters, and now we're seeing real people, and how those things change, how lore happens, and how we look at a real case and it turns into a story of monsters or Snow White and all those different tales and all. And that's what comes. People are fascinated by serial killers and those types of things. But as we you get into the 19th century, people like the Bloody Benders. So they were a family where they had a home where people could come stay. All these people start disappearing. The whole family was in on it, which is crazy to get that mentality of a whole family. Think about, your generational type of thing where you could get a whole family to murder or push them enough or traumatize them enough, to the point where the adults are making the kids traumatize them enough where they partake in this and not say anything. So you always got to be careful with, people want to hide things from each other, especially families. Of course, husband won't tell on the wife won't tell on the husband, those types of things, and you hide that stuff. So it's another mentality that we're going to look into. And of course, probably one of the most famous that a lot of people have heard of, H.H. Holmes. So they said he ran a murder castle, and a lot of people think that he murdered people in there. It was set up that way, but there wasn't any evidence of it. But this guy was killing people over, trying to do fraud schemes and things like that to garner money. And we're going to get into that next week when we talk more about the different reasons people are serial killers, how it breaks down. But in the meantime, we're doing history here. And remember, if you do have any questions, make sure you put them in all caps. We'll answer those on the recap at the end of the show. But also, if you want to say hi, just say hi. I'll go back in later on and say hi to you. But in the meantime, we're going to go into, how they identified them over time. Early methods were just detection, often relied on finding large number of bodies, of course, confessions or killers making mistakes, such as targeting individuals who would be missed, which is a big thing. A lot of serial killers over time in history, the weak, prostitution, they didn't think anybody would be missed, homeless people. So those are always ones they least detect, and law enforcement over time least look into. So we have to make sure we keep our population safe, even if we don't agree with how they live their lives. All people have the right to live properly and pursue things, and hopefully the next day works out better for him. But scientific advancements, late 19th century, 20th century forensics, such as poison detection, when they started being able to pick up poisons and all that, and the forensic pathology, fingerprinting, made it a little easier to connect related murders. And then in the 70s, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but our main topic of profiling comes about. And we also look at, the mind there, nature versus nurture. Research shown killers share common history, childhood traumas we'll get into, abuse, brain damage, particularly the prefrontal cortex, often compounded with they call the warrior gene, which is a variant which affects impulse control. So they feel like a lot of serial killers can't control their impulses, or just can't calm that thing down. I've talked about it before. It's teaching our kids, and sometimes the ability to overcome when they lose. They have a hard time with it. We raise our kids, and nowadays everybody gets a trophy, so they are not able to have that impulse control when things don't go their way. So they have to learn that, and we'll get into all that when we talk about our kids in our neighborhood and how they grow up and how to avoid certain things. There's parenting, overparenting, underparenting. There's no book on it, but at least hopefully there's some tips that might help, and to key in on things that help our children grow up a little better. But key historical themes, less dead concept is another thing. Throughout history, many serial killers have targeted marginalized people. Like I said, the prostitutes, things like that. Anonymity, the rise of larger cities made it possible for them to really, escape into the city, be able to hide more so they can't be detected. Just the childhood traumas we were talking about, and how those bear into things, especially at wartime. And we're really going to key into that with wartime, with the change of our society and how things become more prevalent, which basically brings us in, our early foundation. So let's break into profiling, the real in-depth history. I gave you that history, just a little background. But 1881, this is a very interesting thing, and we're really going to break this one down, because this is the one that really bothers me, because it becomes a thing of, Darwinism versus, what we learned in the Bible and all those things, and how they fought each other. And there's a bias there, but I really think the bias came in 1881. Cesare Lombroso is an Italian criminologist and eugenist, genetics higher race leading possibly to the Nazi race. Is what they looked at in eugenics, is the better the DNA, the better the person. And that's what the Nazi race really looked at. He published The Criminal Man, Anthropological Criminology. He suggested that criminals were evolutionary throwbacks with specific physical characteristics, which he lists as a characteristic as stigmata. That's a very religious thing, very something deep. And in somebody like this guy that believed in Darwinism, thinking that people had defects, that they were monsters. But he's putting in stigmata almost to try and get people away from the religious side and their spirituality, to make it look like the Darwin type of theories and all that we came from apes and those types of things. And, that natural selection, survival of the fittest, those types of things. But really that one kind of disturbed me. And the best thing about it was, of course, they discredited all that at the time with that, the Darwinism versus religion in that aspect of it. And that people are just not born monsters. There's a lot more that goes into it. But really, probably one of the first recognized opportunities to do profiling, of course, is our buddy Jack the Ripper. So in 1888, Dr. Thomas Bond, he was the doctor that was overseeing all the murders that were happening in Whitechapel at the time. So he was trying to profile his unknown subject, which we shortened to unsub. So you guys have probably heard that on a lot of shows, the unknown subject. He examined victims. He concluded the killer had no medical training, but possessed great physical strength and lived a solitary and eccentric life. We don't really know who killed him, but there has been evidence that has come out recently with them matching some mitochondrial DNA, which matched both Catherine Eddowes, who was the victim, and this Polish immigrant named Aaron Kosmicki. So they look into his life, what they know about it. So they're still balancing it out if he was living under an assumed name, that he could have been one guy over the other. But the one thing is, he was a hairdresser, barber, so you're good with that blade to shave or anything like that. But again, that shows no medical training, which Thomas Bond possibly picked up on. And there was talk that Aaron Kosmicki lived with family, so a solitary, eccentric life and all that. Where I guess they said eccentric being at the time probably mental health issues, which of course this Aaron Kosmicki, there was talk at the time in 1891 when all the murders happened. Kosmicki was taken into an asylum. He was there for the rest of his life until he died in 1919. That's when all the murders stopped. So there's potential DNA there, mitochondrial DNA, which it's hard to prove, but it's pretty decent. So if it is the guy, Thomas Bond kind of got that profile very, very close to be the first documented one. So that's another exciting thing. It's a case you always got to look into. There's so many books out about it, but really at the time when the doctors got out of it and became more in the 40s and the 50s is where psychology kicks in, where we're starting to really look at the mind and how things are occurring. One of the first things to do was back in the day, there was the OSS, which is now the CIA. Our government hired a guy during World War II as a psychologist, Walter Langer. He was a psychoanalyst out of Harvard. He was commissioned, of course, by the OSS to create a psychological profile of Adolf Hitler. They wanted to predict his future actions and potential for suicide. So they were wondering if they put enough pressure on Hitler, would he commit suicide? So Langer did a psychological evaluation of everything known, and he predicted that Hitler would commit suicide. So whether you believe that guy in the trench was Hitler or not, the suicide came to fruition with his psychoanalyst analyzing of Adolf Hitler. And he actually wrote a book that you could pick up, The Mind of Adolf Hitler, a secret wartime report. So American presidents after that started requesting more profiles of foreign leaders in case of times of war and how to react. And I know it's still done to this day. It's a little more secret, of course, our CIA, but that's a big part of profiling and all that, how it's government funded at one time. And you were getting success to be able to predict what one of the most horrible people in our history, to be able to get a profile on him and figure out potentially what he was going to do and what he did. Probably one of the most accurate ones was 1956. We had the Mad Bomber running around. So the Mad Bomber was George Metesky, as we found out later, but they had a psychiatrist who was brought in after the police just couldn't figure out anywhere else to go. So on a whim, they asked a psychiatrist, James Brussel. He's a former counterintelligence profiler for World War II, Korean War. He provided the famous accurate profile of the serial bomber in New York. He predicted the suspect would be middle-aged, foreign-born man, Eastern European descent, who lived with unmarried siblings and would be wearing a double-breasted suit. So when Metesky was arrested, believe it or not, I used to live in Connecticut. I live in Ohio now, but Metesky was living in Connecticut. So he was arrested at the time, and when they finally got him down to the police station, he made sure that he put on a double-breasted suit. He didn't know about the profile, so he was photographed with his double-breasted suit. He was living with family at the time. He was Eastern European. He was middle-aged. Everything that Brussel thought he was, and it's incredible. But it's great to see it after the fact, but beforehand, it's very hard to do profiling where you were really looking at patterns, and we don't really know until we actually capture and question that how right it is sometimes. But being right after the fact, that's what we have to get to, is be right before the fact is going to be what we love to do. But again, you guys know I've been in the paranormal myself and doing this. I think it's one of those impossible things. We'll never be able to prove either one to be able to have an outcome, but we could keep trying. Technology nowadays is helping out quite a bit. But let's get to the meat. Let's get to the meat of the whole thing. This is one of my favorite parts of it. Is the FBI finally decided, in the 70s, to bring about the behavioral science unit to look at it psychologically. But at first, it wasn't really serial killers. They were looking more at the rise of sexual assault with homicide. It was raging at the time where they had to bring this out. So this is where we really have to look at the mind of our society. So if you go back, we're talking 70s. So we've gone through the 60s. We've gone through some wars, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War. So a lot of our mentality, a lot of our soldiers, are going through all this mental breakdown, really. And a lot of people like World War I, World War II, men that came back had so much PTSD, became alcoholics, where things went wrong, where they raised their kids. There might have been abuse there because of what they saw in the war. All this creates that steamrolling and all. And we get to the point where we're at that time in the 70s, of course, the 60s, the flower children, live, love, and all this other stuff, a lot of protesting going on. So there was a lot of this back and forth, a lot more information going on like we have now. Everything you could think of, you could get information on. But back then, all this was raging. So a lot of people couldn't really make sense of it. And I think a lot of people started acting out from what their fathers brought back from the war, how they were raised. It seemed like all nice and dandy, but really deep down, what were we hiding? What was the PTSD that was never treated? People became alcoholics, a lot of drug use and all that. And a lot of these things lead to mental breakdowns. So that's what gave the rise to a lot of these different things going on with sexual assault, with homicide. So it brought together FBI's behavioral science unit. It was first originally run by Patrick Delaney and Howard Tetton. They wanted to look at the criminals committing crimes and actionable investigative information for law enforcement, which is a big thing. And they weren't doing this at the time. So it was a collective trying to get this information to see what was going on. But of course, we know more now, and we could look back on it and give that information, like I was talking about with, the wars and how our society changed and what occurred and what might have led to a lot of this, that divide, the tension, politics, wars, how we raise our kids when we're going through things we can't figure out on our own, with PTSD and those types of stuff and traumas. So which leads to a lot of this, it is that nature versus nurture, or what's one over the other. We have to really pinpoint that in. But probably one of the most important parts in profiling history, of course, is when they brought in John Douglas and Robert Ressler. All right. So Robert Ressler is the guy famous for coining the term serial killer. So they needed to look at it in a term. And the science behind it was Douglas and Ressler decided they were going to go and interview a lot of these so-called sexual assault, homicide people, serial killers that they coined, and interview them and see what made them tick. They went in and really they weren't asking a lot of the right questions at first. And that's going to be another topic of how we question people on some of the other episodes. But really, if you look at it, they weren't really questioning it right. And in the meantime, Mulaney and Tetton were still involved, they suggested that maybe we could get somebody else involved and put this all together properly to get a little bit more, as they were trying to do this down in the basement of the FBI. So they had this woman over at Boston College in Boston. So she wasn't going to travel all the way down to Washington. So she consulted. So she put together a program. Her name is Dr. Ann Burgess, an incredible woman. She was a psychiatric clinical nurse at the time, and just, over the years, just got her doctorate. But she was the one that actually put together the questionnaire and how they were going to question these people to get the right information, because we all know serial killers want to get one over on you, so you could question them all you want. So we always have to worry about what information are we getting. So you really have to discern, because of course their main frame is they want to boast and say they killed more than they did. So you have to really ask the right questions, circle around, and we're going to have an episode about how to question people and get things out of them and how to circle around. But we'll get to that. And this is kind of how they develop that, to the point where they're including, interviews with probably one of the more smarter of serial killers. Is a lot of people, the big thing is they think they're the smart, highly intelligent IQ people. Actually, they're not. Most serial killers, when they're tested, are at IQs at 90 or less. So that kind of goes out the door. But some of them are very highly intelligent. Case in point, probably one of the smarter ones, Edmund Kemper, the co-ed killer. The guy was like 6'8", so kind of menacing person. But he was so smart back in the day, he put together a questionnaire for the psychologist, because he told the psychologist, the questions you're asking me aren't going to help. Let me suggest this. So this guy's, changing the whole testing procedure for psychologists while he's still a teenager, which is pretty incredible. And the other really, really intelligent person who was involved in politics and everything, a pure psychopath, I got to say, Ted Bundy. And we're going to, talk a lot about him and his case study, where this guy would learn how to have emotions because he didn't have any, and how he did that. And we'll talk about that. They wanted to understand their signatures, their motivations in those interviews and all that. It came to the point where over time, Robert Ressler has since passed. John Douglas and Dr. Ann Burgess are still around. I know John Douglas wrote one of my favorite books, as you could see, a little backwards, but Mindhunter. That might sound familiar to some of you. There was a TV show on. They had a couple seasons of Mindhunter, and I forget what channel it was on, but it was based off of the BSU and the work of John Douglas, Dr. Ann Burgess, Robert Ressler. So if you ever watch the show, kind of how the counterparts are, Holden Ford was one of the characters that was based off of John Douglas. Bill Tench was based off of Ressler. And of course, Wendy Carr was based off of Ann Burgess. So a few of the things were changed. Some of that's not reality, but it was pretty much spot on where a lot of the work that was done, to the point where a lot of films and the books like Mindhunter were written. Probably one of my favorite films of all time about a serial killer, Silence of the Lambs. And I know Douglas kind of gave some information on that. The author, Thomas Harris, was said to have based the character Jack Crawford, who was the head of the FBI at the time, off of John Douglas's work, which is pretty cool. And the really good part of it. But one of the things that we're going to get into a lot more next week, but organized and disorganized. The FBI developed the primary dichotomy. Organized, of course, your organized serial killer is a planned, intelligent, social, competent, leaves little evidence. Disorganized is impulsive, a messy crime scene. Lower intelligence often lives alone. And as we go and we're learning more and more about the mental side of it with the BSU, in 1984, one big thing that came about was a National Center for Analysis of Violent Crime, which was established to provide federal assistance to local law enforcement. And that kind of stemmed a little bit further from that into what's called VICAP, which is one of the most important things for being able to track a lot of the serial killers. It's the Violent Crime Apprehension Program. It's a centralized computer database to link serial crimes across different jurisdictions. So if there's a similarity in one state to another, that way they could pinpoint things in, because a lot of times nowadays, if you really look at it, some of the serial killers that were caught were riding the rail, jumping from state to state. So there's similarities to be able to latch onto that. Some were truck drivers and all that on their routes in different states to be able to track that too, which they weren't able to before. So that's where science is coming in. And probably one of the biggest things after is how they're trying to get science involved, computers involved with the more of the data. And again, after years of doing the profiled side of things, it's exciting when you say the word, but back in the day when I was getting the information, all it was a lot of data. So you're trying to analyze all this data and figure out, for me working in the prison system, to figure out, okay, how's this inmate going to react if this happens, if if they try and escape, or if a riot happens with them as the leader, how are we going to get this to stop? So those are the things you have to look at. And on the outside of it, using things to the point where there was a Dr. Kim Rosmo. He developed algorithms to predict where an offender likely lives based on locations of their crimes, which they call the distant decay. So that's a principle that'll come up. That basically meaning the interaction between two places decreases as the distance between them increases, which basically means that a lot of the serial killers don't go far from their home because, hey, look at nowadays. Right now, gas is pretty expensive. So a lot of these guys aren't going to drive way out of town, spend all that gas to, unfortunately, dump a body. So we don't want to do any of that. Just being too far away, a lot of times it's familiarity. When you're comfortable in a situation, mentality, what these guys say is when they're comfortable, they go to comfortable locations, which, of course, we try and figure these things out. And that's where it comes down to, especially after their capture. And you see they go to a lot of places, like some of the serial killers dump bodies in the woods where they used to go camping. It's a familiar area. It's something that they know. It's a point of calm for them, where they know they're going to be private. So a lot of those analysis from that type of thing with that geographic profiling is what we call it. It gets a little bit deeper. There's a Dr. David Cantor out of the UK introduced a more academic approach, which you would call it. What are you ever going to do? Smallest space analysis to find statistical correlations between crime scene behaviors, which we're going to go over, and how to look at a crime scene and figure out all the different patterns, what to look for. Just remember a lot of the stuff I'm talking about, just for professional courtesy, there might be a few little things I might leave out. You never know who's watching, but you want to leave out a few things, and hopefully I don't have my brothers that are still doing this get upset at me. But, you want to analyze the structure in a personality test and crime patterns. So the personality that you might pinpoint that profile and the crime patterns, and that puts together another academic approach to look at it with data. And, you want to get into, again, there's so much stuff, there's so much history to all this. And we are coming to the 20 minutes left mark. And I know if you guys hopefully had a lot of questions. Again, we're going to cover a lot of things over the next few weeks. I know the history we threw at you, and we really want to put that home so you kind of know stem, a little base where we're starting off at, so you guys could learn a little bit more. Again, I mentioned a few books. Go back and watch the episode if you miss anything. I would really appreciate that. I know All Access Network would appreciate that too, to watch this multiple times to get the information you might have missed. But of course, Mindhunter, the book, is fantastic. There was other books that I mentioned, the one about the profile of Hitler. We just go from there, and just how history goes. The more you read, the more you watch things. But, I thank God that I got the opportunity to put what I've learned from some of the best in the industry and be able to put it into action and help a lot of people along the way. Hopefully I'll help you guys to learn a little bit, help you look at things in a little different way. That's my hope. But in the meantime, we'll bring Gwen back on if she could hear me. Hopefully we get her back on here in a second. And that way we could see if there's any questions. And again, I want to acknowledge everybody. I really appreciate you guys watching. So there she is. So,
I'm back. I was listening.
Yeah, I know. We're going over it. Sometimes, history could get a little boring. You feel like you're in a lecture. But I think in this case, you really look at what we talked about. It's great to look at history, just like, whether it's paranormal, whether it be in true crime, whether it be solving crimes. If we don't know the history, we're missing that foundation. So we need to know where we came from. We need to know who got us there. We need to know that, yeah, some of these people were quacks, or we look back on it, just like doctors used to think bloodletting would cure people. but we know they learn from it. So we're constantly learning from history. It creates what we call a foundation. And of course, from that foundation, we learn more and more what works, what doesn't work. It's the brave people that try that stuff to see what works and doesn't work to get a better solution. But
It is.
yeah, I don't know. Did anybody throw any questions at you?
Well, we have tons of folks, and I'm just going to say some names that popped in, and I once I went off the screen, I kind of left you alone so you could keep your spot and keep going, so everybody understand. Of course, Stacia, Jeremy Brunton, and I'm going to say that all wrong every single time. Adam Bagan, of course. Asia, of course. Bill Slevin.
Yeah.
Nicole Gaspard. I always say her name wrong. I don't remember who this is, but it's Sears Spartan. Here, I'll pop it up so you can see it. I can't remember who that is. So whoever that is, don't get your feelings hurt because I have to keep up with them and I can't. Of course, Christy Ritchie. Yeah. Me. I was telling everybody, hang on to your questions for a minute. Kenneth Drake, of course, he wanted to congrats.
Yes.
Wonderful. Brother. And let's see. I'm going. Jess Elliott has a question. You want to read it? Jess is the author and a friend of ours. And yeah, if you want to, can you read it pretty good? Can you see it?
I can't see for crap, so you might have to read it for me.
Okay, that's fine. Sometimes we can see it. Sometimes. Okay, she says, are you familiar with, I ain't going to be able to say this. I'm so sorry. Juliana Tofina?
Okay.
Gulia Tofana in the 1600s in Italy. She was selling tonics and perfumes to women who wanted to be freed from awful men. Aqua Tofina. Okay, that makes sense. Let me go up a little bit. They estimate that some crazy number of men were dispatched before she got caught by a woman who brought it. Right. Yeah. But she was wanting to know that was actually very interesting. And I couldn't wait to show you that. I'm going down the list.
Yeah.
Of course.
Well, let me give you a little bit more information on what happened was what she was doing. The men that were going missing, she was melting down their bodies in a vat and using them for the perfumes and soap that she was selling to these women. So that's why she kind of used that saying and all that. So yeah, I remember reading about that case. I'm pretty sure it's that woman. I know there might have been another one that was similar, but I'm pretty sure that was the one in Italy. And she was making soap out of men that she killed and putting them in that. Like,
that's kind of crazy.
If any of the men in the village pissed her off, they became soap or perfume for the women that they were probably abusing. So she probably noticed it, almost like a Dexter type of thing, maybe in a way. So, which is big for a woman because, like I said earlier in the history, women are pretty capable, of course, to do that. But a lot of times they're more of a nurturing type of mentality psychologically. So a lot of times it'll be like a poisoning or something like that. And as opposed to men are a little more violent with their type of killing. But it's not saying that women can't be violent, but majority of the time, really it's the other way around and all that. So.
Well, let's see. Let's get in the list a little more. Morgan Caldwell, Greg Koss, just a little chitter chatter, and I know you're going to go back and read a lot of this and make some comment. Carol Garcia, let's see. Jimmy, hey man. All right, Jimmy tuned in. That's cool. Let's see. Blaine, who when he finished class.
Yes.
Johnny Zappa says hello. Okay. Then Jess again. It's spelled Julia. Okay, thank you, because I am terrible at this. Oh, perfume. There you go. All right, but no, we didn't have any. So if anybody has any questions, if you put them in now, we have a little bit. We can go over. I have no problem with that. As long as I'm out of here by 9:20. So anybody has questions, please ask.
Yeah, because we could reiterate and recap again. I kind of blew through the history. And I like to get through it kind of quickly, and like I said, you could go back and watch if you missed anything. There's so much other history. I kind of broke it down a little bit, some of the key points, but most importantly, the 70s, like we were talking about. But even before
Mhm.
that, um, the lore and history of murderers were a lot of our folklore, a lot of our Greek, the tragedies and types of things that we see plays done upon. The monster was really just a serial killer or a murderer from history, and they don't put it that way. They just considered them all monsters because they couldn't make sense of why some human being would do that to another human being, and have all these bodies and all this other stuff. So it really became lore. Even when I talked about earlier about Elizabeth Bathory, even if that was true or not, really some of our greatest tales, Snow White, the evil queen, and
Mm-hmm.
how she wanted to be the most beautiful. And the lore was is Bathory would rub herself in the young girl's blood that she murdered to help herself keep the youth and be the most beautiful. So that's where a lot of that stems from. Um, it, it's nuts. It's
It
nuts.
is.
But we're talking about history. Our mentality has changed from year to year, and so the way we look at things and how we look at things culturally too. And I'm very excited to get into a lot of the things over the next few weeks. It's going to be fun,
It
and
is.
hopefully you guys get involved. We'll be immersed and all that. I know sometimes the first episode we get going, history, some people find it boring, but I find it exciting, because we can't get into the nitty gritty, the real psychological mind, which we'll be coming up to and get really immersed, and be able to answer questions and help you guys get in touch, not only with yourself and how you think yourself, but how others might be thinking, and the proper to look at it. Another way, a lot of people have certain ways they think of things that may not be what you're thinking. A lot of people think certain things like touching your nose, is body language. A lot of us forget that some people just do that by habit. So we have to take in context and all that. So we're going
Mm-hmm.
to learn more about body language, why people say certain things. So we have to really look at patterns and see
Right. We
where the
do have
pattern
one
changes.
question, Thomas, when you get to
Good.
a point.
Sure.
Um, Carol, I don't know if you can read it again, so I'm just going to read it for you. It says, question: do you think that some are truck drivers traveling through areas so it takes longer to get caught? We've
Yeah.
discussed this so many times. Yes.
It is, and there is a lot of them. The happy face killer was a truck
Mm-hmm.
driver, probably one of the more prevalent ones. But truck drivers do have that ability. They're going from town to town, so they have the means. They have the ability to be able to kill and not be detected. But again, like I talked about, in the 70s, near the end of that, into 85, when VICAP came into fruition, where a crime could happen in one state where the MO is similar to another state, and that's where they start piecing things together. Where if a murder is happening along a corridor, like I'm here in Ohio, let's say it's happening on 90, and it's in that corridor and it's on a line, and it seems to happen from this town to that town. So what a lot of police officers and a lot of people are figuring out, okay, we could break it down. What trucks travel that time of
Mm-hmm.
day, where if they figure out, the time and death of a body, where it was buried, uh, where it was close to, because they're gonna, like I said, they want familiarity. So if you're out driving, you drive this route all the time, there's a desolate area off the highway. So you're gonna be familiar because you drive by it every day, and okay, I drive that route every day, I'm gonna dump them here. So you start taking those things in, and the police are able to pinpoint in maybe on a type of like company that drives that route, and then you just keep funneling it down until they finally have their suspect, and we could bring them in and question them with some. Most of the time we already have the answers. It's just a matter of watching the person we're questioning and a little bit about them and how their patterns change when we ask certain questions, and that way we know we're onto something, to be able to get the fact and put it all together with evidence. And that's kind of how it works, especially the truck drivers nowadays. I think because of VICAP is really why we've been able to stem a lot of that, because back in the day they used to ride the rail. So these people would
Yeah.
get on a train because they really think, Belisca axe murder house, where all those kids were killed, the parents were killed. They were thinking it was the guy that killed elsewhere. because at the time there wasn't VICAP, but there was, as we get older, we look at different crimes from back then in newspaper clippings. A couple states away, there was another crime of somebody getting killed with axe to a family and all that. So we're thinking, hey, maybe that guy was a serial killer that jumped from train to train. So that's another part. Is this the Garth Brooks question?
Yeah, and we actually talked about that on the show
Yeah.
we did together. So that just made me smile because I was sitting here thinking, oh yeah. But yeah, she's basically saying, have you heard of the theory about the Garth Brooks is a serial killer? The author mapped missing, murdered people, and Garth's tour dates. But as far as I've found, the author is the only one with this theory. So I have to wonder if it's his way of making waves and getting famous, or there's a Garth Brooks groupie who does it. Just wondering if you had heard that one.
So yeah, I did hear about that, and it's funny because a lot of people, I mean, the paranormal, and then we're talking about true crime, but really back in the day, I was a demo singer out of Nashville, so I would go down and record in Nashville. I was a runner-up to be on the show Nashville Star the first season. That was the season that Miranda Lambert was on, and Buddy Jewell won that season. But you go in that field and aspect, and I think a lot of the reasons why I didn't really make it in the music business is because everybody said I looked like Garth Brooks. So when you look too much like somebody, sometimes you lose that doorway to open for you. Unfortunately, and just the similarities and all that. I'm not going to blame it all on Garth, but if he is a serial killer, then
Well, Jess was saying
that
some of his lyrics
that I look like him, and if he becomes a serial killer and I'm one that profiles people, that would be very weird. That part of my life was everybody said I looked like him, which would be very eerie and weird. But I really, at this point, with all the people that are around him, all the concerts, his opportunity to be able to do that, I don't think there's enough time and opportunity out on tour. If anybody's ever been on tour, I've had many tours that I've done. I don't have enough time to do any of that. You're setting up. I know you have people to do that for you when you get to Garth Brooks status, but when you're on tour, you don't want to really go anywhere because you risk the chance of something happening where you can't make it to the concert and then you have to give money back. So I don't think he'd put himself in that situation. It is said that he really treats his fans really well. To the point where he stayed 24 hours to make sure he signed everybody an autograph and all that. So really that mentality, that's hard to fake. Most serial killers, we're going to get into their mind frame where, they can fake things, but it's hard for a serial killer to fake for 24 hours to go sign everybody's autograph. So for me, being a fan, but really looking at it as a profiler, it's fun to think maybe he is and all that and speculate.
Did you see Jess's last comment? You got to read this.
No.
She said, oh, well, there's our answer. You are the groupie. Ha ha. Just kidding.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not really a groupie because pretty much I think my career stayed stagnant because of him. I'm more of a hater in a love-hate relationship. But I think, in life, everything happens for a reason. I think if I went that route and it went the way I was hoping it did, like Garth Brooks' song Unanswered Prayers, I wouldn't have, met a lot of you guys. So yeah, there's always a reason for everything. And we have to thank our lucky stars sometimes. We think the worst is happening, but actually it's the best waiting. So that's always a big thing, especially with the Garth Brooks thing. So I'll forgive him.
Well, it just, you know what, you were meant to do this and be in the paranormal and do all that you do and meet us. So
it is. You really look at it. Even my whole life, just doing, like I said, the music, paranormal from a young age, where I got to figure out who I was. I didn't know who I was at a young age, why I was feeling things and all that, and being lucky enough to meet somebody like Lorraine Warren to help me, Ed Warren and all them, and have that time. And just garner friendships over those years with friends like John Zappis and all that, and people that really look at things on a cerebral way with critical thinking. Not only in the paranormal do you have to be a critical thinker to be able to debunk things or to see things in a 360 view, especially when it comes to studies like demonology and parapsychology. you have to look at it critically and all that, not everything's a demon, of course, but not
Mhm.
everybody's a serial killer because, they did something when they were younger, had trauma. Not everybody becomes a serial killer. There's always that catalyst. And we're going to learn a lot on this show. Um, what turns people, what the catalyst is, what our society is. Like I said
Yes.
earlier, really the big prevalent for the FBI to change and get this behavioral science unit, there was a lot of crime going on that was sexually based and murder. But if you really look at it, how come it wasn't before? How come it wasn't back then? We look at World War II or even World War One, there's
Mhm.
a circle there where this person fought in World War One, had PTSD of what he saw. So he had a harder time being the father or the parent they wanted to be because they're suffering not only with the life they had, what's taken from them as a young child, 18, whatever years old, some maybe younger, their mentality changes and they get the PTSD and things get rewired. Then we start learning that on an epigenetics type of thing where we're passing on generation to generation of that generational trauma, which we do a lot with Wardruna to be able to help with that.
Mhm.
But even in profiling, as you really look at it, so World War One to World War II, so we're going through all these generations of unhealed trauma and how we
Yes.
raise our kids with that unhealed trauma, the alcoholics, the hoarder, whatever negative thing that could happen to change the way your mind thinks. So that's why a lot of more things are becoming more and more prevalent with, the serial killers during, the most serial killers, not necessarily caught, but in action, going
Yeah.
off of the computer, what they were picking up through VICAP was in the 80s.
Oh,
So you
true.
really think of how we're spinning around with the Vietnam era and all that, all these wars of PTSD and how we lost all these people trying to make sense of it. Our psychology changed. But unfortunately, as the psychology changed, they were going through all this with all the wars, it didn't catch up quick enough. So
Mhm.
there's that disconnect where we disassociate as a society, where all this war's going on, and we numb ourselves to it to the point where a lot of these serial killers, ended up being military people, PTSD, come back, couldn't handle it, or thought they were still at war, where the mental part comes in, where they see somebody and they disassociate, think they're still in Vietnam, they end up killing somebody. And this is a pattern for them over time. We really look at those types of things, but really that era, that's our disconnect when all these wars happened. So, and how we react to them and how our military people need to get a little bit more help. But our older generation we were the tough guys and all that. We don't need
Yeah, and
help.
it
We're
was
not
shameful to
fighting
ask for
those
help
things.
back then. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't. Well, really, psychology wasn't ready at that point either.
Nope.
They weren't up to the task. They were still like doctors back in the day, bloodletting. They couldn't see the mind and how it was reacting and how the changes were happening and how we passed it from generation to generation to generation. It just got worse and worse as the wars went on, how we raise our children, what we see in the
Mhm.
war come back. Even women had to go through, wartime too, being alone and all that. And the whole mentality of our nuclear family just kind of died there. That's where really it starts stemming in. And
Right.
it
And
looks
think
like
about
the
it.
perfect family, but not.
Yep. And back in the day, they came back and it was shell shock and it was shameful to have
Yeah.
shell shock.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
So,
And yeah, so they pretended they didn't. So,
and that's the hardest part in our how we look at things and how we figure out things now, all the different ways to be able to help people.
yeah.
Um, Now we're trying to catch up because in
Yeah.
epigenetics and generational stuff, it takes almost 7 generations to fix what was broken. So
Yes.
we really have to stay on top of things. And I'm really hoping, with this show, I can help a few people out there, whether it be with their own kids as they're growing up. We all need help. You can't do it on your
Yes.
own. It takes a village sometimes to raise our children, just to see things, whether you're a teacher, somebody that lives in the neighborhood, to see something that just maybe isn't right and to do it in the right way to get them help. You not be the old Karen in the neighborhood, but the right way
Yeah.
to get help and suggest and just be there in the right way. That's important too. But yeah, and we're going to learn all that stuff to the point where
Mhm.
even the people we can't save, how to recognize it. I've talked about body language, how people's eyes look, and we have to really take in the context of it, and even cultural stuff too.
You
Some
helped
cultures,
me one time with
yeah,
a big thing. Yeah.
yeah,
We'll talk about
and
that one night, but it was a big
yeah,
thing.
we will. Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. Hopefully we'll do an episode. Again, we've done one before, but I think I want to get in a little deeper of the victim, because it's very important to know how the victim thinks, because sometimes the way the victim thinks is how the serial killer reacts to them. So those are the things
Yes.
we're going to go over, of the profiling of a victim and the profiling of the serial killer. But Dr. Ann Burgess, when she would interview, her main thing was why they got her involved was she would interview these women that were raped or almost killed by these people, and she would interview them and profile them and ask them questions, what left it open. And that was very important work that people could read about. There's a lot of documentaries about Dr. Ann Burgess. I think if it wasn't for her, Douglas and Ressler probably wouldn't have a lot of the stuff that they have. And I'm telling you, I still got to say John Douglas is probably like my biggest like mentor in life and all that. What I read about him,
Right.
just having those opportunities and all that. And probably one of the best things is he actually instant messaged me and wished me a happy birthday
Really?
back on February. So I was pretty
Wow.
pretty stoked about that. And it was very nice of him to take the time, even though we never met in person. But hopefully, we're friends on Facebook. Maybe he'll watch the show. And maybe if you are watching, John, I'd love to get you on the show. And I think your perspective would blow people's minds. And again, guys, make sure get Mindhunter, and you could read a lot about, their work and kind of a little bit about the TV show that was on. Of course, it's Hollywood It Up. Of course, you know that. But
Oh yeah.
the real story about how they interviewed and what they got from people, and that'll really help when you watch the show. It's kind of one of those books to have to the side to really help learn about profiling and how they look
Mhm.
at things. And again, one of my favorite movies, Silence of the Lambs, and all that, and just that one-on-one interview and all that, and a lot of things that stem from that movie and all, and just the lore of it. And I think a lot because of that movie, a lot of the TV show came out, and more people got interested in the art of profiling, whether it be from somebody, the FBI agent, psychiatry nurse, psychoanalyst, whatever type of psychiatry, for me, forensic psychology, just the way to look at things and
Right.
get that history, and like we look at things, and we're going to be doing that in these next few episodes. And I'm excited to bring my knowledge. Am I the be all end all? Of course not. I'm not. It's a love for it. I want to bring that passion to you guys and how I look at things. It may not be the way you look at things, but am I always going to be right about it? No, but it's just my perception.
Yep.
How I look at a crime scene, how I interview somebody, and the do's and don'ts, and how to get that type of information to get to the facts, to get to a conviction. And we're going to go through all that. It's going to be fun, and we're going to have a good time doing that. And I'm glad you guys joined us for this first episode. I'm glad to be back on the network talking about one of the coolest subjects ever. Again, we never do this to promote the serial killer. We're here for the victim. We're here for our families, our friends, to help raise our village, hopefully the right way. So we
And
can
understand it. It's a big deal to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, we have
I
to
learned a
understand
lot
it.
from Tom,
Yeah.
I have to say. And that one episode, not episode, but what one thing that happened to me that sticks out. I traveled a lot last year, and it taught me to look a lot different, like observe things a lot different. And I was already very hyper vigilant because of being a medic for so many years and stuff. So, but I learned another way to watch things. So
it is, and for me, the training, and on top of being a shaman, because I know Stacia does this with me, and we laugh about it sometimes, but it really comes down, sometimes it's not a laughing matter.
That's
I'll
true.
walk into a place. I could walk into a place and in less than 5 seconds, I could tell you who's a danger, who could help, where all the exits are, where to sit.
Yes.
I always sit facing the door, so if anybody comes in, I could do a quick profile if I'm in danger or not. This is
Yep.
just stuff I naturally do. People say it's from trauma. Yeah, it could be a little from trauma, but a lot of it is training, where it's secondary. For somebody like me, it's secondary. I know for other people it is too, but it's just instantaneous that I could pick it up. It's almost like getting on an airplane, walking down the
Mhm.
aisle. Hey, if something happens on this airplane, I know that guy can help. I know that guy can't.
That's what I was
To the
going to
point,
ask you. Do you
yeah.
do what I do and check out everybody
Mhm.
you walk? Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
I instantly do. I'm walking up the aisle and I look and then I sit down. And when the plane takes off, I could tell by the backs of heads sometimes
Yeah.
how people move and all that, that's somebody that can handle themselves. And these are things we'll get into. Certain body language, context of body language is probably the most important thing, because there's pattern and all that, but sometimes the pattern could fail you because we're dealing with other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
There's some cultures where people automatically just shake their head no, and then some body language, when somebody asks them to say yes and they shake their head, you're thinking that's a sign of them saying no, but that might be a cultural thing. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
look into all this crazy stuff and how to do all this and how to do it properly. Are you going to get 100% answer? Probably not, but it's going to be close enough where we know we have enough to go on to, of course, go down my old rabbit hole and be able to get the information. In theory, you keep digging, you keep digging, you keep digging, and finally you get to a point where it turns into fact, and then you have that person cornered and you have an arrest. So that's
Yep.
what we're going to work on. But again, I'm very happy. I know we breezed through tonight, so little bit of nerves getting back into this, but the nerves are
You do.
because I have
You're awesome.
I have
You don't
so
have
much
to worry about that.
passion. Yeah, I just got so much passion on the subject. Again, it was part of my life for a long time. I'm just so happy that even though I don't do it anymore, I get to talk on shows like this. Still to this day, I left the state of Florida in 2007. I still have people that call to get an opinion, which to me is probably one of the best gestures of being remembered for, your point of view to help
Yeah.
out in a situation. I know, Gwen, you send me somebody, helped her take another look at her subject for her book.
Mm-hmm.
I have other people that have reached out to get some idea on how to look at their character for a book, or to get a read on, a case that's actually going on now that people are writing books about, to get a profile,
Right.
to really dig down into the book. I like your friend I talked to. She has actually talked to this particular criminal, and she was asking certain questions. And I said, well, if you go back in, ask this question, ask it this way, do this, you're going to
Right.
get a better look into what his childhood was, and be able to get maybe a little bit more context or more information to build your character, which is a reality in this book, to get more information, because some people aren't so forthcoming of their traumas as childhood. Sometimes you have other ways to be able to get it out of them, because a lot of killers, they're proud people, of course. They want to control, so we always have to be careful of that. A lot of them, the narcissistic people, all the different antisocial behaviors that we're going to go into, but those are the types of things that they don't have feel. So you have to ask things a different way, or they do have feel, but they're in chaos. So other ways that we have to ask to get information about them, especially if we're writing a book or we're trying to pinpoint in on how we could track somebody else down, as we learn things from all that information. But again, we're talking to serial killers. They're very manipulative. So it's almost to the point where I think 40% of the information we've gotten about them over the years is probably a bunch of BS. So
Mm.
we're
That sounds
hoping
about
that
right.
40%.
Yeah.
It is, but we're hoping that 40% we could get to more of the bottom of that and really pinpoint in on uh, being able to capture some of these people beforehand instead of after the fact,
Mm-hmm.
and then saying, "Hey, my profile was right." It's like, who gives a crap? All these people are dead. So we want to be able to pinpoint in a little bit more, and I think a lot of the science is changing. Of course, technology has helped out a lot. DNA, capturing cold cases,
Mhm.
cameras everywhere. People have their Ring cameras, seeing people go by, being able to pick up more. Currently right now, the thing that's very upsetting to me, I can't figure out why, is Guthrie. The news lady whose mom has gone missing and all that. All those cameras, all in the area and all that. I don't know why that case bothers me. There's something wrong there. There's
Yeah, I have
something.
a theory,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's not that time for me to think. But I have a theory of
Yeah.
my own, and I'm sure somebody out there is thinking the same way. But
Yeah, but that's the
I do not
side
like
of it.
it.
That's the worst part of being able to not being in the mix of it anymore. Is like, in my mind, I was like, I want to interview a certain person, and I think if I
Hmm.
give me a few minutes to interview them, then I feel confident that I could get a little bit more information. But sometimes they might already have that information. It's just something they're keeping out of the news right now to be able to get more evidence. So a lot of people make that mistake. They're like, why aren't they thinking this way? Why aren't they telling us this? Sometimes they got to hold that information back, because certain things have to fall into place. Just like life, sometimes we have to be patient for certain things to happen in life, because they're going
Yep.
to happen. You can have faith in it. But especially in a criminal investigation, like I said, disclaimer, there might be some things we're talking about profiling and how you look at things in a crime scene. I might leave out a few things, just for professional courtesy, because some of that stuff could really, you get into the wrong mind, and we could have a problem. And I never want to cause that for people that are still in this industry working. And so, but if you kind of see me on a day that I'm kind of being nice off air, maybe I might tell you a few little things. That's because I know that you're probably not the type of person that's gonna, a little bit more of a controlled scenario. Let's just put it that
There
way.
you
So,
go.
yeah, come out to Connecticut Paracon. That's coming up in July 11th, and
Wait, I think I still have the poster. If not, I'm going to load it up.
yeah,
We have to erase some things to have. There's the poster. It's not the whole ad.
there it is. Yeah. So,
I love it. I love that poster.
yeah. Even they were talking about paranormal stuff, but hey, watching the show, you might have some questions. Some I might be able to answer and give you a little bit more tidbit that I can't really, again, by professional courtesy, release on a,
Right.
where we're hopefully thousands of people are watching, just
Well,
for the
I
sake
will
of the
tell you
network,
this. I
and
will tell you this. I looked back and
yeah,
on one show on
yeah,
Monday night, just one show on just my profile, it was
yeah.
35,000 people.
Wow,
And that was the day after. That was Tuesday, so that wasn't even 24 hours later. So
yeah,
just because, and I tell everybody, hey, say hi.
yeah,
But a lot of people say, oh, I listen to it in the car, or I
yeah.
listen to it while I'm doing dishes or cooking dinner,
If you're
or
listening to it, and
yeah,
like you said, a lot of the shows that All Access Network Television has on, um, I'm going to look at it this way. Some of the information I'm going to give you, hopefully, like Gwen said, it could save your life.
yes,
You could look
it
at
helped
something
me.
differently.
I was always hyper vigilant, especially being a
Mhm.
medic so many years, working in the hospital, just
Yeah.
being a single mom for a
Yeah.
long time. But now I look at it a lot very different because now, and I have accepted my abilities, even though I block them when I shouldn't sometimes. But now I get on a plane or I go in an airport or go in a restaurant or gas station. I know things. Yeah. And unless it's somebody I truly trust, I do not sit with my back to the door.
Yeah, exactly. And
Exactly.
for
Yep.
me, for working in the industry, um, even back then, I had to look at it in two different ways. Is this
Mm-hmm.
me picking it up as a shaman, or
Mm-hmm.
is this me picking it up in training? And I really had to discern that because, of course, nobody back then knew I was a shaman and how I see things.
Right.
And they wonder how the hell I figured crap out in the prison. I was like, how did you know? And stuff like that. But really, it comes down to trusting my training and trusting my gut instinct or my shaman abilities. But the fact of the matter is, you could do that all you want, but you're gaining clues and information to go down the rabbit hole and get the information that's going to help solve a particular crime, or get the suspect, or what we call the unknown subject, and make it a
Yep.
known subject. So instead of our unsub, we want to be a known subject. And that's the whole fact of the matter. And then if we, again, are able to discern a lot of that stuff very quickly, like I said, in 5 seconds, I'll go in and see a store and I'll know exactly who's this and who's that. Um, that takes time. And again, a lot of the way I look at things are how I was brought up. Not all of us we're not all brought up the same. We all have that different fingerprint. But the way I was brought up, things that I saw growing up or in high school or in college that make me say, okay, because I experienced this in my lifetime is why I could look at this way. So that's what
Exactly.
makes, yeah, not all profilers or people that are in certain industries are all the same. Their life experiences sometimes dictate. That's why some police officers remain police officers, some become detectives, the way they look at things and how it happens. And unfortunately, still in some departments, there's still politics involved. So are we really
Unfortunately,
getting
yes.
the best person on the job sometimes? Or are we getting somebody that's going to push it through for political reasons? That's still something that upsets me. But I ran into those issues back in the day. Um, it's funny, a lot of people didn't know I was in the paranormal back then, but also a lot of people back then, I'll say it now, because it's been since 2007. There was a lot of work I did that 99% of the people I worked with didn't know what the fuck was going on at the time. So
Right.
I was
Well,
hired
I
to do a
hate to,
job, and
yeah.
I did the job well. So
Yes, you did. Yes, and there's a lot of people. I want you to. Tom is going back. He's looking at all the comments. We did a little
yeah.
different than we do some shows, but we got
Mhm.
about 3 minutes. And Tom, I'm going to say to you, tell them how to get in touch with you if
All
they
right,
have a
so to get in
question or
touch with me, of course, Thomas Patrick on Facebook. You can instant message me if you have any questions or anything you want to see in the future. Of Archangel the Paranormal on TikTok and on Instagram. Of course, I do Tuesday morning serial and those types of things, and weird spooky facts from Ohio and weird phrase origins and all that. But this is our baby now with Profiled. Of course, we got the upcoming Connecticut Paracon July 11th. So www.paracon.org. Check out the site, get tickets. Of
and
course,
you're
reach
also
out to.
going to be in something in next month that I might get to see you in a
Oh
station.
yeah, we got some stuff going on in Ohio at the old Shawshank Redemption Ohio State Reformatory of Parapsychon. So we'll make an appearance there, and Gwen will probably be with us.
I am. I'm
Yeah.
booking my flight tomorrow. Matter of
Yeah.
fact. Yep.
There you go. And it's going to be big because we are going to really be bringing Wardruna around. That's going to be our first of our many, many areas that we're going to be. We're going to be all over New Orleans, Cleveland. Of course, we live here in Cleveland, so it's not really the backyard. But, of course, all through New England, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. A lot of speaking engagements for Wardruna. Of course, I'm talking about Profiled this show, but Wardruna does have a lot to do with that, how we look at the mind, kids growing up, generational traumas that divide, and how to look into that and help people in a holistic way. Whether it be with the metaphysical, we do have certified medical people on our Rolodex that we could reach out to that do believe in the paranormal, where there isn't that stigma. We've worked with a lot of the Cleveland Clinic. We worked, with the VA, and all that has given us cases. And yeah, we're really diving in, and I think Wardruna is probably one of the most important things in my mind going on here in our world, whether it be the paranormal, whether it be, what we're talking about tonight, anything along that nature. I think it just isn't about the paranormal. It's a wide open,
Yep.
us getting treatment and not getting into that over and over circle, like I talked about with World War II, in that circle of how people had the PTSD, and it's led to this point where we were able to talk about the high rate of serial killers and murders and sexual assaults and things. So, but we're going to get to that more. I know we're here at the end. I know you got to get
Yeah,
off and do another show. Who's
I
on
do.
after us? Who's on
Lynn
after us?
Lynn
Okay.
Dorman, and he
Yep.
has Joe, and I'm gonna say that I butcher last names, people. So just
Yep.
remind me if you come on a show to say it correctly, because I do butcher them.
Yeah.
Cara, I think Joe
Okay.
Cara. He calls himself Insane Joe.
Nice.
I'm not real familiar with him, but I will be finding out. So
Yeah.
stay tuned.
Well, if he's insane, maybe we could profile him and all that.
There you go. And don't forget, every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central, Mr. Thomas Patrick with Profile.
Right. Appreciate it, guys. And I will get back to all those messages. I love you guys all. And thank you for the first episode. And we will see you guys next week on the road. I'll be headed down to Florida. So wherever I am, I'll be coming to you from live. I probably won't have my background. I don't think I'm bringing that on the road, but we'll have hopefully a cool background. So.
And he's stopping to see us. So that's a good thing.
Wink, wink.
Yeah. I get to see my both of my friends, so I'm so happy.
Yep.
But anyway,
Sure.
have a good night, guys.
See you later.